Hello, and welcome to a sunny book nook. Today I'm talking to you about my March reads. I don't know why I gave 2 thumbs up, but anyway, it is raining outside, the birds are chirping, it's a spring shower going on. There might be some thunder and lightning because there was some earlier, so I apologize for that background noise just in advance. But I have my iPad here in order for me to go through my Goodreads of what I read. March was a really good reading month in that I read a lot of really good books, mostly 4 and 5 stars, honestly. But it wasn't that great because I didn't read as many books as I usually do, mostly because I was traveling, and when I'm traveling, it's not that when I travel I have less time to read or I read less, because that's not always true. It's more so that while traveling, I ended up going down some TV show rabbit holes instead of reading. And I am considering making a video about Arcane, the Netflix League of Legends adaptation cartoon. I know someone in my comments, at least one person, has asked me to make a video about it, so please let me know if you would actually be interested in that. It's a little bit of a diversion from what I usually talk about on the channel, but also I would definitely integrate some of the stuff that I've read and books in a sort of, putting 2 texts together, intertextual reading type situation that, I love to do as a multimedia girly. But anyway, let's get into let's count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 books I read in March. All right. The first book that I read, or the first book that I finished in March, was Mammoth by Balthasar, translated by Julia Sanches. This book we read for my lesbian feminist book club, which I run with a couple of my friends, mainly my bestie and sister Reem. We had a wonderful discussion about Mammoth, and it really made me think about the book in a different way, of course, as discussions often do, but I really enjoyed this. This is a 4-star read for me. I liked it as a fiction pick for the book club, and I thought that there was a real sense of alienation in this book. It follows a young woman who is kind of living at the fringes of society. She gets a bunch of random jobs, and then she ends up going out to the countryside. Oh, and this is translated from the Catalan. She goes out to the countryside and ends up working for this sheep farmer in different capacities, or living out on this land, and it has a real kind of pastoral but grimy vibe. And she is really obsessed, she's a lesbian, and she's really obsessed with getting pregnant. That is she really desires it, and so she ends up fucking these random guys to try to get pregnant. And yeah, she makes a lot of decisions that are just what are you doing? But I think that's the fun of following this book, and following this character. I think that the title is really interesting because no mammoths appear in the book. Spoiler, I guess. But it is a really wonderful short little read that is pretty densely packed with some powerful language and imagery and a real sense of, again, isolation and alienation from the self. There is a scene of animal cruelty and violence against kittens in here, and there's a real farmland farm animal vibe here that is really present. She ends up befriending this dog that she names Knock Knock. Yeah, it's a really weird but kind of mundane and strange look through this young, disaffected woman's life who feels very emotionally detached. So, enjoyed this. Let me grab my water, go drink some water right now. Next book that I read, a major diversion from Mammoth, was Finlay Donovan Digs Her Own Grave by Elle Cosimano. This is the 5th book in the Finlay Donovan series, which I have been following along with. This, I think, was my favorite edition of the series besides the first book. I liked it. I rated it 4 stars. I thought it was so fun, and it doesn't feel like just kind of a weird diversion from the original story. And it also is really about motherhood and Finlay Donovan's friendship with her babysitter, her live-in nanny, Veronica. But I think even though it's a really enjoyable, fun, funny read with a lot of hijinks, and it also involves an older, nosy woman and the potential killing of husbands, and Finlay Donovan's husband being the primary suspect for a dead body that's appeared in a backyard. I think all these elements are really, really fun and emotionally compelling, because it's oh no, if Finlay Donovan's husband didn't do it, then who did? And if he was cheating on this during this time, then who was he cheating with? And sorry, readjusting my skirt waistband. Anyway, like, who is he cheating with, and trying to find that woman down and track her down and figure out what the fuck is going on. Again, it's a lot of like amateur detective work, as you know, Finlay's life seems to be. But then she also has like this cranky old woman, the neighbor, who's super nosy, living in her house now, because her house is the place where the body was found, in the backyard. And yeah, it's really funny trying to work around what this old woman is doing, and the way that all the schemes kind of end up in the end. I enjoy it. I love when an old lady is in a mystery novel and it is fun and quirky and interesting. So yeah, I liked it. 4-star read. The next book that I read was a memoir. This is Bibliophobia by Chihaya. This was sent to me by Penguin Random House, so thank you so much to the marketing team there. I liked this. I rated it 4 stars. I thought that it was a really compelling memoir that follows the experience of an English professor who struggles with suicidality and mental illness, and her sort of lifelong battle against mental illness, and how she ended up in like the psych ward as she was going through a year of her trying to write her book, her monograph, and attempting to get on a tenure track position at her college. She's living in New York. She feels suffocated by books. Bibliophobia is really a book about a woman whose life's work and passion, and the only thing that she thinks she's good at, which is reading, becomes something that she can no longer do, that she's unable to do, and how she navigates around that. It is an incredible, very interesting survey of the literature that she has found compelling in her life, whether that be The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison to Anne of Green Gables, A Tale for the Time Being. I think that she talks about her experience being Japanese American as well throughout this book, which is interesting, and her relationship with her father, who was quite violent, but also the mundanity of her life and her experiences. You can really tell that she has a very sharp literary mind, obviously, because that's like the world that she's immersed in, and she herself like tells us that she doesn't really remember or recollect some of the things that she was going through because of her mental illness and her instability, and how the depression just like sits with her and rots with her, and how that affected her relationship to books and to reading. I found it really interesting, quite compelling. I would recommend it if you are a memoir reader, if you are a reader who reads, if you are the English major who is afraid of ever not wanting to read anymore. This is a book that is for you. I really like the chapter about Anne of Green Gables, because when I was a kid, I loved that series, and her analysis of it, and then also the sort of Japanese tourist culture surrounding it is really interesting. So 4 stars, would recommend this memoir. The next book I want to talk about is my only 5-star fiction read of the month, and that is My Death by Lisa Tuttle. This book was so crazy and so good. It's really about art and the process of art making as a woman. She's a sci-fi writer, Lisa Tuttle, and a lot of her written works have been sort of underground, undiscovered by a lot of readers, but she also had a real, like she was in the sci-fi scenes before it hit like the literary world in a real way. And it is also a book that's so so full of like this meta narrative. It's basically just about a woman who, her husband died a few years ago. She's a writer, and she ends up being really obsessed with this painter and or this artist, this muse, this figure that she really wants to write a biography of. And so she ends up tracking her down, interviewing her, going to her house. It's a really interesting look at the literary world, the art world, the way that women are treated as muses, and the self-insert sort of characteristic of writing and of writing other stories. It's so weird. It's so good. It's kind of a horror novel, but also kind of a sci-fi novel, but it's very literary. I would really recommend it. I don't want to say much more because it's a book that you should kind of go in with very few preconceptions, because that's how I read it. I listened to the audiobook, which is really good. I would highly recommend it. You should read it. It's It's good. The next book that I read was Fundamentally by Nussaibah Younis. This book was a 4-star read. This book was so good. It was so funny, just like darkly hilarious in a way that I actually was laughing out loud. And my book club co-host and my sister in feminism, Reem, was the one who first read this book because I sent her an arc of it, and then she was like, "Sonny, you really need to read this." So I did. I listened to the audiobook via Libro FM's ALC influencer program, I believe. So thank you to Libro FM for that as well. Wow, this was so funny. It basically follows this woman who is an academic. She wrote her dissertation. She wrote like a really impactful paper on the study of de-radicalizing ISIS brides. And then she ends up getting like sent to the UN to go do that. And working with these refugee camps, she becomes friends and close with one of the girls in the refugee camp named Sarah. And it's about her dealing with both her own personal relationship to Islam and her family and her mother, and the way that her mother cut her off years ago, and they're dealing with the aftermath of them being back in each other's lives, but her mom still fiercely wanting her daughter to, like wear the hijab and be Muslim, and our main character is like, that's not for me, because she spent many of her years being in those spaces. It's a British book, it's very British, and it's just a really empathetic, heartwarming sort of portrayal of the bullshit of the UN, the apparatuses of these like NGOs. Oh my god, it was so frustrating, and you could feel the frustration of our main character as she was trying to deal with all these different like fuck ass people, and also the different governments that are involved, and the who gets repatriated, which ISIS brides are seen as worth saving, and who is able to become is able to like leave this refugee camp. Basically, in the process of trying to kind of help out this girl in particular, and also in working with these women, she comes up against so many obstacles, and she ends up like, at the very beginning of the book is her being like, she's like trekking through the mountains with like a baby and this girl, and she's like, how the fuck did I get here? And then we get the whole story. We get some flashbacks to her own childhood and her growing up, and her relationship with her best friend, this woman she had this like homoerotic close relationship with, and they were on and off again like lovers, and they were best friends until the relationship sort of dissolved. And so in the aftermath of this like kind of breakup, our main character ends up like fucking up to the UN and trying to do this work. It was so good and funny, but I think some of the political elements, in terms of at least how it deals with like the family, was a bit not to my taste. But that's just my perspective as a reader, I think. Even though it is about ISIS brides and it's like quite dark, there's so many moments that are just, again, so funny. Like the characters that she deals with and the things that they fucking say. Like this one imam that they're interviewing to see like which religious leader can help facilitate these women's transition out of the refugee camp, hopefully. One of the imams that she interviews is like, the only thing worse than a Shia Muslim is a Jew. It's just like so on the nose and accurate and funny in its portrayal of so many different types of people. And as much as it takes shots at fundamentalist Islam and the oppression of women in larger society and the experience of sexual violence for women, and also the apparatuses of the UN, it is also very like full of heart, and yes, I really enjoyed this, so I would really recommend it. It was a 4-star read. Next book that I read was the latest edition in the Wayward Children series by Seanan McGuire. This is Adrift in Currents Clean and Clear. It was a 3-star read for me. All of the books in the series are about 3 stars for me, because I enjoy the sort of portal fantasy children's narrative, but it's like not something that really captures me in the way that a lot of other people who read the series, like, again, I'm gonna read everything in the series, but it's not like, oh, this is my new favorite series or whatever. But this one follows a girl. She is adopted from a Russian orphanage. She was, I think, born without an arm, and this American family that adopts her like fits her up with this like prosthetic that's really uncomfortable. She is really unhappy with the whole situation, but she's expected to be like this grateful orphan. And then she ends up getting transported to this world of beauty through this forest. She ends up seeing these giant turtles that become her friends and her mentors. And of course, like in all these books, it comes to an end, and it's really tragic and heartbreaking. But it's full of warmth, and I think like the way that McGuire explores themes like disability and girlhood and queerness and across all of these books is really compelling. So I enjoyed Adrift and Currents, clean and clear, and yeah, 3-star read. The next book that I read was a 5-star nonfiction. It was Undoing Drugs, The Untold History of Harm Reduction and the Future of Addiction by Maia Szalavitz. This book was so good, such an interesting and compelling and well-written journalistic history of the harm reduction movement and how it came from the sort of bleach your needles movement, the needle distribution movement, the way that this is all happening during the HIV/AIDS crisis of the 80s, and the focus and the need for the drug-using community to access help to avoid getting HIV/AIDS, and also sort of the different ways people are approached and the ways that different institutions and like it's like not Alcoholics Anonymous, it's like Addicts Anonymous or something, like how AA has informed treatment plans, or the way these different treatment centers are really abusive and terrible and not using treatments that are not backed by science. She interviews a wide variety of people, from philanthropists who have helped fund the harm reduction movement to former and at the time current drug users who were leaders in the movement and who helped start organizations and do needle distribution sites, and their relationship with sobriety, wanting it or not wanting it. Szalavitz herself is a former heroin user, and in interviewing these different users and different ex-users, the questions of, who should be at the front of these different organizations, non-users or users, and the instability potentially of having active drug users be at the forefront of this movement. And she interviews doctors and psychologists and looks at different programs, such as like in the UK, there was this program of basically just heroin treatment. So heroin addicts would just go to the treatment center, get their once a week heroin dose or whatever, and then go about their lives. And it was a really eye-opening way of looking at drugs and drug users, and how the war on drugs was so devastating in how it approached didn't approach or abandoned and recast drug users as criminals and violent, when so many people who use drugs ultimately just need to be treated with the humanity that any human being deserves. And sort of the formation of the core ethics of the harm reduction movement and the way that different organizations approach it and different ideas and personal experiences with harm reduction. It is very, very good. I highly recommend it. I learned so much that I didn't know before, and it also really puts forth a strong case for legalizing all drugs, for at the very least decriminalizing all drugs and drug possession, because it's just like the way that drug users are treated, the way that addicts are treated, and the way that different drugs, from alcohol to caffeine to heroin to the opioid epidemic. She really looks, also the chapter about the opioid epidemic was also so eye-opening to me, in the way that the media treated it versus how doctors were being criminalized, and then pain relief medication seekers were, thrown out of the ability, like we're no longer able to access pain relief treatment that they needed. It was so compelling. It was just a really beautiful story of resistance against a drug war culture, and a culture that seeks to dehumanize drug users and addicts to the highest degree. It was so terrifying and horrifying to read in this book, the dehumanization of people who use drugs. It was just so heartbreaking, and a real shock to your reality, and understanding the lack of empathy, the lack of an acknowledgement of shared humanity between non-users and users, the government and users, and wow, it was really good, and it was very much focused on the American history of harm reduction, and she talks extensively about how, you know, this is a limited history. It's a documentation from a specific point of view and vantage point of her being like in the 80s and 90s at these protests, or in these courtrooms, at these major wins, at these different losses, at the losses of different community members who died. The development of Narcan as a widely available overdose reviving treatment, and the fight to get it out of hospitals and into the streets, and like just the sheer vastness of how much the movement, how many lives the harm reduction movement has saved, and how so many elements of it are seen in our day-to-day lives, and how different practices of harm reduction are so crucial in how we think about using drugs. And, you know, I think like she also approaches like COVID from like a harm reduction standpoint, where there's a real, and especially with addiction as well, as like it can become a very like all or nothing approach, you know, like, well, if I'm not using clean needles, if I'm gonna use and I'm gonna relapse, I might as well just use whatever, and that can be really dangerous and lead to an overdose and a death, whereas, you know, like just being safer about needle sharing and sources and doses, and the knowledge that relapse is not like the end of the world, and also that there's so many complicated and different ways that people can get into and out of drug addiction. It was really good. So yes, highly recommend this one. Oh shoot, I forgot to pull this one off my shelf, or was it over, where did I put it? Imperfect Victims, Criminalized Survivors and the Promise of Abolition Feminism by Leigh Goodmark. This is another nonfiction read for our March book club, Lesbian Feminist Book Club. This book was so enraging and compelling and necessary and so good. All of us loved it. Like, all of us got so much out of this book, and it was, oh my god, it was so, oh god, it just got at me. And I actually recorded an audiobook of myself reading this book, because it doesn't exist. An audiobook of this book doesn't exist. And so I recorded one for my book club members, and I sent it into our Discord and everything. It's not perfect, obviously, because it's not like I have a studio. It's not like I'm a professional voice actor, and, you know, but I think also voicing this book and reading this book out loud also helped reedify how horrific the criminal justice, the criminal legal system is towards survivors. And this book was so informative, and it really taught me so much about how horrible both male violence against women and the state's violence against women truly is, in such detailed accounts of many different survivors' own stories. And the reality that self-defense for women in killing their abusers is very rarely a justified in the eyes of the court situation for manslaughter or murder. It's heartbreaking. And we also look at the way that youth are criminalized here. I learned so much about how, she mentions a stat that's like, the majority of women who are in prison are bisexual or lesbian, whereas like 1%, it's like 30% of women, 30, 50, I forgot what the exact percentage, but like the majority of women in prison are bi or lesbian, but like only 1% of women in the US are bi or lesbian. So it's like the disproportionate representation, the way that Black women are so over-criminalized and so deeply abused and mistreated by the criminal system, by the criminal legal system, by these courts, by these prosecutors, by these judges, by parole officers. It gets into sex trafficking and what the consequences of that looks like within a criminal legal setting, the experiences of youth and criminalization, girls facing gender violence, the reality of post-incarceration, the trappings of being on a sex offender registry list. She talks about the sex offender registry list, and she talks about jails and prisons from specifically an abolitionist feminist perspective. And it's something that I think a lot of people do not really understand within the feminist movement, the way that criminalization harms survivors, the criminalization of domestic violence, the criminalization of violence against women is often utilized. It's written so that, and it operates so that women are unable to be free. And she puts forth a really robust argument for abolition and how the prison industrial complex does not help women. We see it in the ways that so many of these women who are her clients, how it's impacted them, and it's so enraging. And oh my god, it's like the type of book that you need to read if the question of what do we do with the rapists if we abolish prisons is something that sits in your mind. Because this book shows us what actually does happen in real life currently at this very moment to survivors of rape and sex trafficking and assault, which is that they are criminalized and mistreated by the courts. These very existing courts that are supposed to protect women don't do that. That's not their job. And I think the way that these women are treated by the court, by different officers of the court, officers of the law, and how, like, it is an aberration for a woman to be freed after killing her rapist or abuser, and the standard is that that's not, and how basically every single woman who is in prison has faced so much trauma and gendered violence in their life. It just makes me so, it's like every woman in prison does not belong there. There's no woman who belongs in prison, and prisons shouldn't exist. Like, it doesn't solve the problems of gendered violence. In fact, it only reenacts it. And also the way that different political actors are present in this, and how different administrations and governments in terms of giving people pardons is such a pain in the ass. And oh my god, you need to read this book. Like, it's so packed full of information that people do not know enough about, and it's full of real life women's stories that are so traumatic that reading them actually raised my fucking pulse. Like, the shit that these women have gone through with their partners, and then to deal with the criminal legal system. Oh my god, infuriating, but so good. You really need to read this book. The next book that I read was a historical fantasy, and I listened to the audiobook over the course of over a week or so, and I enjoyed it a lot. It was Hild by Nicola Griffith. I picked this up because Jess from Sunbeam's Jess really recommended this series, and I liked it a lot. It is a reimagining of, or an imagining of, I think, 12th century, 11th century Britain, or, what would later become Britain. All these different, sort of ethnic groups and kingdoms and small petty, kingdoms with the over-kings and stuff, and the politics of the court, and how Hild, from a very young age, her mother sets her up. She's the niece of the king. Her mother sets her up so that she is able to speak her mind by making her the seer, so that she's the king's seer, and she has these predictions, or she is able to see the future. But we see the ways that her seeing the future is very much just her noticing things, her paying attention, her knowing the nature, the character of different people within the court, and the secrets that she holds, and the ruthlessness with which she is a military leader as well. It is a brutal book, and it is a fantasy in the sense that we have no idea what 11th century Western Europe looked like for real. We don't really know. And so the imagining of the very true and real mystic powers that people had at those times, because of how materially it impacted their relationships and their lives and the politics of different court systems and different wars and ongoing invasions and capturings, and also the onset of Christianity, the priests, the Roman Catholic bishops who end up showing up there and converting people to Christianity. We see the process of Christianity conversion, the way that different women in the court and other knights and fighters and the king and everyone plays a key role in what would become an anglicized Christian country. We see what leads up to that in this real way from the perspective of a young girl, like from when she was very, like 5, I think the beginning of the book starts off at, to when she's a young woman, and her coming of age as well amidst all of this. It's also a queer book. I think her first sexual encounters are all with women. She has such a beautiful and wondrous way of seeing the world while also being very keen on the machinations of power. And the world that Griffith writes is so well researched and robust. I think a lot of people dislike this book because it feels like, I don't know, it feels like overly dense or packed with the knowledge and the research that Griffith clearly did. And they feel like it was, I don't know, like, it just felt like a history book or whatever. But I think like that's what makes it so interesting. There's so many different characters, it's hard to keep track of, but the overall narrative and the story within the setting of the reality of this pre-medieval time period was so just immersive and, again, like very well researched, like down to the setting of the landscape and the birds, to the way that Hild herself learns to read and write through different priests, this Irish priest, the way that this world really looks. Like, it's so interesting, and I really liked it. So it was a 4-star read. Not a 5-star because, like, again, I wasn't like tuned in enough, locked in enough while reading and listening to the audiobook, which I highly recommend, for me to like be able to keep track of everything. Like, I think you would need like a flow chart to understand a lot of this, but I think like that's what makes it so compelling. I'm excited to read the next book in the series, Meanwood. I have that one checked out and I do want to read that one. And the final book that I read in the month of March was Enemy Feminisms, TERFs, Policewomen, and Girlbosses Against Liberation by Sophie Lewis. This is another 5-star read. I fear the nonfiction this past month was just top tier. This book has really reframed the way I think about so many things. She also quotes Jo Nestle, who edited The Persistent Desire and was like the femme during the feminist movement of the 70s, 80s, 90s, the revival of butch femme culture. Sophie Lewis gets into the sex wars. She gets into the ways that different feminist movements that are feminist work against feminist liberation. Like, she interrogates these different historical figures, whether that be from the suffragette movement and the sort of like cultish terrorist group nature of the British suffragettes, to the like Mary Wollstonecraft and the way that she said that women are the N-word of the world, like the way that the sort of humanist racial politics of Europe during this time in like the 19th century have really informed people's approach to feminism. We see this like kind of transmasculinist figure who was herself a like kind of self-appointed cop, even though she didn't have any real authority from the government, but she was a fascist. Like, she was buddies with Hitler and still, you know, like a homosexual, like still someone who, you know, she talks about like Radcliffe Hall and sort of the inversion politics and Radcliffe Hall herself, her sort of fascist sympathetic politics, the way that fascism itself sort of becomes integrated in different women's movements, and the sort of KKK feminism, the gun feminism, white supremacist and transphobic natures of different strands of feminism. She also talks about anti-abortion feminists. Like, there's so many different feminists that she interrogates here, and it's very good. And also beyond that, she puts forth a lot of feminist analysis towards everything from like Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon and the sex trade, to porn, and again during the sex wars, and yeah, just like so much stuff that totally has reconfigured a lot of the ways that I think about feminism, feminist histories, and my own personal approach to the politics of feminism, and the ways that feminism of the past has failed or has succeeded in what it's delivered, how they fall short of liberation. You know, the title is about against liberation. You know, like what does these liberatory movements do for women for real, and what are the different subjects that these feminisms consider? It's a real Marxist, feminist, reproductive, utopian perspective on the history of and the present day configurations of feminism. She takes shots at everyone from Jenny Holzer to the culture wars and the way that different news media sites maintain and justify a sort of specific type of feminist discourse, Islamophobia, transphobia within feminism. Yeah, very good. Very, very good. You should definitely read this one. It is quite fantastic. You gotta read the whole book though. Whole book. Each chapter gets into a different type of these anti-liberatory feminisms, and she also is able to utilize each of these things to interrogate like what we should do about this information. What's the purpose of studying this stuff? Yeah, very, very good. Highly recommend. You should definitely read Enemy Feminisms by Sophie Lewis. Hopefully I will be able to interview Sophie Lewis actually upcoming. I reached out to her to do an interview, probably for, I don't know if I want to do a live stream yet or if I want to record a Zoom recording for the two of us and then send it to the book club members, because we've read Sophie Lewis's other books, her book Full Surrogacy Now for the first book of our book club, and if I end up doing that, then I will definitely put a post on the community page with soliciting y'all for questions you have for her. But you should definitely read this book. It is so good. So anyways, those are the 10 books that I finished in March of 2025. Thank you so much for watching this video if you got all the way through it. I really appreciate you being here. And if you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I would love to have you around. I will see you soon with an upcoming video, hopefully. All right, bye.